Perfect. Pascal, would you like to do us the honor?
Kia ora tatou. Thank you for joining in and tuning in local, supporting local. This is the 7th edition of this Doesn't Time Fly, and the goodness keeps on giving. So thank you for being back. It is a great opportunity for you to connect with the knowledge and the people you need to keep on the journey of recovery that you started. Thank you, Paulina, Tony, and Valerie for continuing to convene this group. If you're joining in, first, please make sure that we can see your name. If we get a chance to see you, if you can just turn on your video just to say hi. We'd love to have met with you face to face, but right now we can't quite yet do that. Kia ora. And if you want to make sure that your name is there, if you haven't done this so that we know who's in the room, use the chat that Paulina will aptly monitor, and I will help. If you have any questions or any particular mention, I know you're also watching from Facebook, so add your questions to the Facebook comments. Without further ado, passing on to Paulina so that she can introduce our panelists this week to talk about mindset. Kia ora.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Pascal. So hi, guys. For those who don't know me, I'm Paulina. Tony, Valerie, and myself have kickstarted this, I don't know, 7-8 weeks ago, just to getting local experts to help local businesses. And we have the pleasure to invite a couple of panelists every week to have a discussion about a subject you guys have shared with us you wanted to talk about, or a subject which is just popping up as we go. Today, actually, I'm going to join the panel more actively. So Valerie and Tony will do all the monitoring and everything, because it is a subject which is dear to my heart and I work with a lot. Oh, here's your plane, Tim. So how it works is basically we have already a bunch of questions from people who couldn't attend. There's more people going to join us throughout this conversation. And feel free to use the chat, as Tony's already started, to ask your questions. Tony and Valerie will make sure that we actually get to that we get the questions asked and that we're going to answer, hopefully in one way or another. So please welcome, we have Gail and Shane. Gail, we'll start with you. Can you please share a little bit about yourself? Because I don't really want to just read a bio.
Hi everyone, my name is Gail Page. My business is called Positive Pathways. I'm a leadership development coach, trainer, and workshop facilitator. Been in business 21 years, and I'm very much about helping people grow and develop their skills, especially around conversations and communication and reducing conflict and bullying in the workplace. Perfect,
thank you so much. And Shane, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. And just want to say thanks, Tony, Valerie, and Paulina for inviting me on, and Gail too. So my background is I've been in corporate for 12 years and I started my own business, Create Leap, over a year ago now. And I have 2 focus areas where I help businesses grow and develop, from individual mindset up to reaching or realizing their vision. I also help athletes in sport. So I ran mental skills performance program for Bay Plenty last year. Also work with some individual athletes and did some work with Warriors as well. The head coach, Steve Kearney.
Perfect, thank you so much. So as you guys can hear, all 3 of us aren't originally from New Zealand. We have funny accents, but we are true living in Tauranga in the Bay of Plenty area and absolutely loving this country. So I would call us locals. Are we locals? Definitely, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think between Valerie, Pascal, Gail, Shane, you know, you're definitely, it's more of an international flavor, which I love about this. Have it showing that international experience, bringing that to the local forefront. It's fantastic.
Perfect. So I'll kickstart with a question for Gail and Shane, which we literally started to have that conversation before we started recording, which I stopped. So we're coming back to work, level 3, and soon there will be level 2. So every one of us is one way or another, returning into the workforce as employees, but also as employers to create our new norm. So how do we go back to norm? And I think, Gail, you had this really awesome start, so I'll start with you. What do you think?
Well, I think, when we talk about resilience, we talk about bouncing back. Well, to me, moving out of this COVID-19 bubble and going down the different stages or different levels, it's not about bouncing back, it's about bouncing forward. But it's about looking back to see what worked in the past for us, what didn't work in the past, what we can do more of, what we can do less of, and what we need to start doing and stop doing.
Cool. What about you, Shane? What do you think? How do we get back to the new norm?
Yeah, well, I really like what Gail said there, because I think looking forward, how do we get back to norm? I mean, that itself is a question. What will normal be like in the future? And I think most people have the idea of, can we get back to the things that we all were? Or is there a hybrid model of what we're doing now to back in the workspace? So can we actually work from home? Can we work in a different way? Or maybe we think we can actually hold that space where everyone's back in the office and we all talk about this, I suppose, piece of history that it was just something that happened. So I think actually for me, it's asking really good questions of ourselves. Because I always say that the questions, or the quality of the questions that we ask of ourselves, really dictate the quality of life we have. And just going back into what Gail said, those questions should be always looking to what we can do going forward, but thinking about the experience and reflecting on what we've had in the past to bring forward with us.
Definitely.
So, Pascal, I had the same question. What are good questions or good quality questions to ask? Well, from a perspective employer to employee, for ourselves, and employee to employer, like what would be really good quality questions to start off with when you see people back in the office?
Maybe I can refine that a bit and kind of ask the question: is there actually a new normal? What was the old normal versus the new normal? And what I'd probably ask with you, start with you, Paulina, since you want to get involved in this discussion today, and you've been working through with us and talking to many business owners over the last number of months. What is the feeling out there that you guys are talking to around business owners, employees, employers, and even those that are no longer in work, which are different, as another struggle in itself? What is the new normal, and is it actually a new normal, or are we just going back to the old way in a different way? Start with you, Pauline.
Good question. So I think I've experienced a mix in the businesses I've been to. Most businesses have either this, all right, they were already on the brim of thinking of something new or evolving rather than pivoting, if we want to talk about it, right? Like, and going and saying, I always wanted to do that and never had time. So they then went, and it's like going in an online space instead of providing services, providing a product, being much more high tech, but also high touch. So what used to work, especially when in like, say, online programs, no longer works, because every consumer is looking for that high touch point. They want to actually have a conversation with someone. So like in this forum, if we would just record it and not actually have this conversation, it would be a completely different experience. People want that high touch. The question asked, are you okay? How can I help? How can I support you? So I think this has been really, really big in businesses, from a business consultant to business owner, but also from employee to employer or employer to employee. We find that people huddle much more together, and it's been incredible to see how many teams have actually stepped up and said to the business owners, you're not alone. Let's do it together. And in every single one of those panels and live discussions we had, we hear the business owners say that it's actually not It's not been me, it's been my team. My team helped me to achieve this. My team has helped me to achieve that. What it does, though, for the employer or the business owner is it leaves you in a very vulnerable stage, which you might not be used to, right? Like you might be used to being the leader, telling people how it's going to go, what the strategy is going to be like, and which direction you're going. Now you are opening yourself up to it's no longer me, it's a conversation we are all having, and together we're going to take the business further. For me, this is a very exciting thing, because that's what I've been trying to teach everyone for the last 3 years, right? Or tried the conversations I was having, that don't, as a business owner, you're not alone. Let your team members in and let's have the conversation together. So a lot of business owners were forced to do this. Of course, there's business owners who go, I don't know what to do, like there's nothing I can do. And then it's just more reaching out to others and saying, okay, how can we think outside the box?
So Gail, what has been your experience around that, and probably following on from your bouncing forward conversation before, and we've had conversations previously around which we'll get onto around the positive conflicts. But right now, what have you seen, and what kind of actionable steps or tips are you been out there telling business owners and employers and employees and to move forward?
Excuse me. I think that when all this started, none of us have been through this before. And a lot of leaders were finding that they just were totally flummoxed. They haven't got a clue what to do. And so I decided I would write a little ebook on leading teams remotely in times of crisis, which is on my website, by the way, people, positivepathways.co.nz. And even though I say
nice plug, Gail, nice plug, good one.
Hey, come on, you got it. This is me, Tony. But the reason I wrote it was to give business leaders a bit of a roadmap into how they could lead their teams through this. And, everybody talks about how the leader has to look after their team. But one of the things that's in that little book is that, like on the plane that you've got behind you, Tim, the video or the stewards always say, in terms of an emergency, put your own face mask on first, your own oxygen mask on first, before you can help other people. And I think people forget that. Leaders are struggling to do the best that they can with what they've got. But everybody finds it really, really hard to deal with the unknown. So that's where coming back to vulnerability and allowing people to see that you haven't got all the answers, but together you'll find the answers and you'll find a way forward. I think a lot of them are struggling because some people lead best by command and control. And because they're not actually physically there, they can't do that. And they're having to learn a new way of leading, which I think is great, because I don't believe that command and control works. But, that's just what my thinking is.
You raised some good points there with command and control, which can lead into leadership and bullying in the workplace, and I'd like to touch on that later. Shane, but coming to you, I think these last month you've been house husband and dad, so you probably haven't, but I'd be keen to see what your perceptions of your conversations around with people and with some of the coaching that you've been doing, and I guess from the athletics side as well. How are the players or athletes that they can't do anything? There's no sport going on. Are they still training? And what's your conversations been like these last couple of weeks?
Yeah, it's very interesting. I suppose in the space of the athletic world, where physical stuff is dominated, they've actually had a lot of time to be able to work in the mental space. So that means then that, let's think about the Olympics, for example. It's actually a very difficult place for those athletes like that going off to the Olympics, because they've been working for probably about the last 3 years to get to a physical state to be ready for this July. So now it's put off for next year. And even that's up for question too. And it's something that Gail just touched on. Well, what does that uncertainty mean? Well, it really goes back to really the values of the person, the purpose of why to do what to do. So are they in it for the glory of winning, or are they actually in it for something that's deep and more meaningful to them? So it's actually quite interesting when they start to talk about, you know, values. What's really important to them now is, how do I show up? What can I be doing with my time now? So it's forced them to think a bit more about the character and the personality behind what they're actually doing. And also they've then got really innovative about the kind of key questions they've asked themselves. I still need to physically train. So you probably saw on the news as well that some athletes created some box swimming pools and tied a bungee cord onto themselves. And you go, well, that's, for me, that's brilliant innovation. But also having the time to reflect on, I think for me, reflection is huge, because that's where the learning comes from. Purposeful reflection is pre-asking the question, well, what do I want to get out of my time right now to understand where I can go? And it kind of filters back into what Gail was saying, you know, business owners around the medium, small size business owners might find it quite difficult, because it could be the baby of the business. They've created that baby and it's them, it's who they are. Then a lot more people have come on, and they've allowed more roles to take shape that they then can carry the business. So when we talk about mindset, there's a huge shift in mindset to have that command control response, to then allowing others to take up that space. And something that Paulina touched on as well was quite interesting, was it seems almost the natural energy within the business or organization has said that actually we want to take acts of leadership and not just help, but we actually want to take action and grow and give direction to the business.
Do you think that you know, some business owners have there's a mind shift around, I'm a business owner and that is what defines me. I'm not a leader, because, and look, I've been on a few number of courses where there would have been 24 people in the room from small businesses, and it was about a CEO mindset for CEOs course, right? And 90% of the people in the room didn't even think they were a CEO. So do you think, how do we get that in, I guess, that mindset of being a leader from business, and especially going through a crisis, into the new normal? You know, what kind of how do we retrain ourselves, or what kind of, and I love the purpose on why we do what we do. I've heard stories of people, business owners, just going, I've had enough. These last 4 weeks have been fantastic. I'm closing the doors. And then kind of going, what, and also I want to close the doors, but owning the business is what defines me. This is who I am. So how do we, what's your guys' thoughts, and feel free to jump in anyone at any one time here, around how do we shift our mindset into the new future, and enveloping these new ways of talking, communicating to our staff, our stakeholders, and of course our employers? Are we now creating a more open communication community?
I still hope so.
I mean,
I hope so.
you go first, Gail.
No, you know, I'm like Tony, I'm all about open conversations and things. But I think when you're talking about leadership, people think that you have to have a title to be a leader. In actual fact, we are all leaders of ourselves. And we need to be looking at, you know, our behaviors and how we contribute to a discussion or to a business or what have you. And I think that finally, business owners are actually recognizing that every one of them is a leader, but it's their behavior that defines them as a leader, not their title.
That's exactly what I wanted to say. Like, we need to shift the mindset. We need to, as individuals, it doesn't matter which role you play in the business, you need to think about the fact that you are a leader. You're a leader to your family, you're a leader to your community, you're a leader to your own life. You are in charge of your own life. Believe it or not, people believe that life happens to them, but life is a number of choices you made from the day you could consciously make a choice, right? So what happened, like I can define exactly where I am now from the decision I made 10 years ago. Now, some decisions we make are conscious, some decisions are unconscious. So I think the first, and I'm not saying that everyone understands that concept, but I'm saying that the first thing we all need to understand as business owners and as employers and employees is that we are all individual leaders, and it's up to us to make a choice of how we want to show up in the world and how we want to lead. Some people do this for open conversation, and that has something to do with the type of personality you are as well. So I talk about how you lead depends on the different type of personality you might be. But some people just don't even, they don't know what they don't know. So what they go is they don't know they are leaders because they've never been recognized, like the parents haven't shared it with them, their friends haven't shared it with them, etc. So as a business owner, the first thing I would say is you just need to resign to the fact that you're a leader. And you can be a good one or a bad one, but bottom line is you are a leader.
So I guess bringing on to Shane and the purpose stuff and those points there is what are the I guess a mental checklist of getting in the right mindset from an employee and an employer and a leader, and to a point those that are no longer working, what's the mindset checklist that we need to go through to show up? How do I show up? What is how do I get up in the morning and go, right, these are the tick and I do, how do I, and of course a mind shift change does not necessarily happen overnight, but what are the key things we can start doing right now to, and why should I do what I do? You know, why should I lead? Why should I follow? How can I contribute?
Yeah, nice points, Tony. And I think to me it comes down to, again, I talked about reflection, but I suppose it's asking questions of myself, because leadership, really good leaders are very well self-aware. So they know the kind of space of how they conduct and behave and what that actually means to the, let's say, the conscious collective, which is everyone else, the consciousness of everyone else. So it's almost asking the two questions of what are the conversations that we're having currently? And then what are the conversations that we actually need to have? And then holding that space to allow that to happen. I actually have a quote from Aristotle, and I love this quote, but because I think this time now really forces us to think about it. So Aristotle's quote is, "It is the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it." So now that, when I go back to self-awareness, that talks about your own unconscious bias and how that could be showing up. And be mindful of that, because you're talking, Paulina talked a bit about the unknowing and then the knowing. So how do you bridge that gap? Because that's where learning and growth and development comes from. So it's asking a question, what are we actually having now? Or what do we need to have? And asking that question because a lot of us have had different experiences through this whole pandemic, this crisis. So what's the experience like for you? What's the experience like for someone else? Because I know people who are, let's say, if we label them as the introverts, and they love it.
I loved it. I had the best 6 weeks. Deep down, I wish we had another 4, but not so much for business, but for myself.
Well, absolutely. You're starting to understand, and especially in a team, who are task orientated and who are people orientated. Those, and where do you get your energy from? If you're task orientated, I've completed a job, I've got my energy, I want to get on to the next one. Those that are really people orientated are kind of more suffering. And then we're getting on to, which probably leads on to a point around digital fatigue. How do we, if this is going to be the new norm for the foreseeable short term, how can we get away from, there's a number of tool sets we can use to get away from digital fatigue, the Zoom fatigue. And I guess just like some comments and your thoughts around that, guys.
I just wanted to, and it will tie into the question as well,
Yep.
Tony. I want to touch back on something what Shane said. It's like, you know, the questions of what conversations do we have versus what we need to have. I think from a your first question was like practical tools and tips of, you know, like mindset of in what's the checklist. I think the biggest tool I've ever learned is the power of now. So what I mean by that is, as any human being, when you, there's this saying that anxiety comes from expecting what's happening in the future, and depression comes from suffering what happened in the past. So a lot of people get into a bad mood or anxiety or whatever because they are predicting a future which hasn't happened yet. So if you are in a state, especially with as a business owner or as an employee, where you're going, oh my God, in 6 months' time, you're not going to be here, of course, you're going to work yourself up. So the power of now is literally going back inside yourself and going, am I okay right now? Do I have everything I require right now? Because you can only control right now as it is. So that calms your nervous system automatically. So instead of going, you know, this might happen and that might happen, and I need to have this conversation with someone which might be awkward, you're projecting a future which hasn't happened yet. And the outcome is at this point still unknown, right? Like we make an assumption that what will happen will happen. The other side to it as well. So literally, that's what I do all the time. When I feel myself getting worked up, the first question I ask myself is, am I okay right now? Do I have everything I need right now? Yep. So let's deal with right now first before we go to the next step. The other question I always ask myself is when I'm in a conversation or in a mindset where I'm going, what's going on here? Like, this is not me, is, am I taking on, like, are my boundaries intact? Am I taking on someone else's troubles? Am I taking on someone else's anxiety? Am I projecting into my future, you know, am I predicting a problem which might not even happen? So really being intact with your boundaries, and that takes practice to go in when you're in a bad state and you're feeling yourself getting worked up, to really stop and go and say, what's going on here? Am I projecting, or am I being projected on? So am I taking on someone else's stuff? And I do those conversations with myself all the time when I feel myself, you know, my blood rise, like blood pressure rise. I go and say, am I actually, like, am I being impacted by this, or am I taking on someone else's thing? And it's going back to the power of now. So when you are having the conversation and you in a conversation going, what's the point of it? You're asking yourself the question is that the conversation I actually really need to have? Is going back to that right now moment. Am I in the moment okay? Or do I need to address something else? When it comes,
sorry.
And it's like, so what I wanted to bridge is like, when it comes to digital fatigue, it's like boundaries are really, really important. So a lot of you guys have experience. I have a digital calendar. Anyone can book in at any given time. So be really disciplined of booking out time frames where you're like, actually, you know what? I only gonna book out 60% of my time in digital meetings, or whatever the right fit is for you. Everything else will be booked out so I can do other things, right? And have breaks in between and all that kind of things. But go ahead, Gail.
I was going to say, Gail, look, I really love the power of now, being in the present, and some other themes coming through right now is start stopping, reviewing what your purpose is, reviewing what you're doing right now. This is a high pressure situation that we're finding ourselves in, employee, leader, employer, etc. So just want to summarize that. Gail, carry on. Sorry.
I was just going to say, in response to Paulina, you know, asking, one of the questions I always get my clients to ask themselves, and I ask them, is how is this frame of mind, or how are these thoughts serving me right now? Because you will always find an answer, and it may not be the answer that you want or expect, but often people will be thinking, you know, they catastrophize. And instead of talking about what if something positive happens, it always goes to the negative. So I think it's very much a case of, we were talking about the right questions. It's the right questions at the right time, and allowing ourselves to find those answers come up within us. But getting back to what you were saying about the digital fatigue, I think the thing that happens is that, when we're in a setting like this, although I have to say this one doesn't feel like it, it's really cool. But when we're in a setting like this, where you've got all these faces looking at you, it's almost as if you've got to be on, you've got to perform. And what often happens is that when we feel as if we're being watched all the time, we can go into a fight or flight mode, because there's all these eyes on us, and we find that we're watching ourselves a lot as well, and looking for cues from other people, because we can't get the same cues that we would get if we were in a face-to-face meeting where we could see all of the body language and things as well. And I think, we're wired to pay attention, but people don't like silence, and they don't like silence at the best of times. But in situations like Zoom conferences and things like that, nobody wants to be the one who doesn't say anything, or they don't want to actually physically withdraw back from it, because are people going to think that I don't agree with something that's been said? So we're under a lot more pressure in some ways in this kind of environment. And what you said, Paulina, about scheduling, this is just another meeting, and we should be scheduling our diaries in the same way that we would whether we were going to an ordinary meeting where you go down the hall to another member's office or what have you. So I think we just need to be aware that this is no different than any other meeting. We just have to schedule, because it's a way of keeping ourselves psychologically safe as well.
I think, and there's some good points. And again, it's reiterating that being self-aware of who you are and how you operate. And believe me, Gail, my wife loves silence, especially right now with all of us at home. She'd kill for some silence. So being in an environment like this, and I think we tend to keep looking around when we're in normal meetings. So being fully on, absolutely. And as we come to these situations, we're finding ourselves in high pressure situations that we have to be always on, that we as business leaders, owners, employers, have not been trained to do. We don't go to university to talk about or do business degrees or courses about how do I be fully on, which probably brings me to Jim's question around for you, Shane. Athletes train for this. They train for high pressure situations, but they could also have. So what kind of process or training do elite athletes practice for pressure fatigue scenarios? That great question, Jim. Thanks for that. So, Shane, have you got any thoughts around that?
Yeah, thanks, Jim. That's a great question. That's an interesting one, because they go through the practice a lot about this, because this is where the elite athletes need to perform. So to be able to form at that level, they need to, what's talked about constantly with elite athletes, is reach into that potential. So getting to that potential means that you have to actually work hard and perform in the dark when things get nasty, when things get really difficult. And I think we're all experiencing that now, a small bit, I think. I think New Zealand is protected in some way, and there could be a bit of a false sense of security there. But back to your question about what do athletes practice for these fatigue scenarios? Well, it really is to get back and get centered and grounded within themselves after they go through those sessions. But they know that they have a plan in place, that they go through those sessions for a particular purpose. So they're demonstrating courage of something that they haven't really done before, in the challenge of wanting to really go beyond where they have become or have become from. So after they go through that very difficult space of physical and then neurological thinking, because they still have the same thoughts, self-doubt creeps in, and then the next moment confidence creeps in. So that's where they're working with. So how, when they're in that space, when they get out of that, it's about being centered. One of the things that they practice a lot about now is mindfulness, meditation, getting in that space. And it's just, for me, I think there's a great opportunity for everyone to actually be in this space, because I think it's an opportunity to just, we talked about digital fatigue. We are forced into this position. I think we also need to be forced into a position of actually switching off and going, I need some time and space for myself, whatever that is. Because you can actually practice that mindfulness of just being on your own.
Shane, what I love about this is, and I want your view on what I'm going to share now, is I have a few high performing athletes as friends, and when I ask them what is it, which matters, and how do you make sure that you don't burn out, is they say most of them say they practice for the worst case, to be at their best at their worst case scenario. So what do I mean by that is, like, if someone is having a really bad day, I'm not talking you're sick, but if someone is having a really bad day, to still train and perform. Or if the weather is shit outside, rather than going and saying I can't be bothered, they go and say I'm going to practice and I'm going to be the best I can be in that scenario, which gets them ahead, right? So I have how I took it from a business perspective is when I practiced is when I was a public speaker and I traveled the world. Normally what I do is I travel the world and then instantly 2 hours later I'm on stage, right? So you might have traveled for 10, 15, 20 hours, and then 2-3 hours later you have to present and you have to perform in front of those people. So to perform while jet lagged and sleep deprived, I make sure that when I practice my keynotes or presentations, I might have gone for a run or up and down the mountain a couple of times, and then I'll practice it to make sure, okay, if I'm fatigued and tired, how do I show up in my worst case scenario? Do you do anything like that with your high performing athletes, Shane?
Around,
like practicing to be the best around in your worst case scenario?
oh yes, we have a framework around. So when we work with athletes, especially, it's more around success rules and breaking that down. So what does success mean for you?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the key questions is, what would success be like on your worst day? Because athletes always need to get the feeling of being successful. So when you get some type of feeling of, you know what, on my worst day, I nailed that. Because that's where learning and growth is never a linear path going up. It's always ebbs and flows and ups and downs. You talk about resilience as well. I think athletes, the resilience are getting up early in the morning. Some of them are training 3 times a day. They're doing it day in, day out. People watch the TV and then they're playing a rugby game, and that's what people see. But behind the doors, there's a lot going on. Just like us, there's a lot of resilience of what we've just shown of being in lockdown with your family and kids. So for me, Tony, it was quite interesting. I've stopped a lot of my work because I needed to babysit. So my profile right now is babysitter.
I love it.
What I hear, Shane, now from you, and it's keep coming to my mind, and Gail and Pauline, it's such a good mix of information. But what I hear is, almost as a business owner or an individual, you have to really go and reflect and say, why do I do what I do? And what is my purpose? And at the end of the day, for some of them, the answer will be, well, I actually don't know why I do what I do, and maybe I need to redirect myself, and maybe I have to do something different. But ultimately, I think that future will pull you through if you know that you're there for your customers, or if you know you're there for those glimpse of success, or that. And I really like what Shane said, you know, that reinforcement of winning the game in the sport industry. I think for us it's the same, you know, a phone call from client to say thank you very much, I absolutely loved it, or in the shop, you know, or in restaurant owner will get the great review on whatever internet. So I think those are the kicks that what keep us moving as a business owner, just to give this, I'm there for my customer, and when it comes back, it's just wow, it's amazing. So just reflecting on why you do what you do, and then you think about how and what. But yeah, going to the basics. And I think this time did give us a great opportunity to actually reflect. And I hope people are using it for that purpose, rather than stressing out about the future, rather than saying, what's going to happen in 6 months? I think thinking that things will bounce back to normal is absolutely crazy right now. We have to kind of package it up and throw it away, because things were really busy and we were stretched to the max, and then everything stopped very quickly. And I think there is no way things will restart very quickly on the day one. We will not bounce back. It will be like quick stop, but very slow restart. And I think rebuilding, reinventing in some cases is what we need to really focus. And I really like the point about being present, because that uncertainty about the future is something that we can't control. It's like, you know, being on a sailboat. You've got the ocean, you've got the winds, and you've got the sail, and the sail is the only thing you can actually control. So we can't really control much what's going on outside. So yeah, great points, guys.
I also really love, Shane, and that can be transferred into team and at performance as well as into business, is what does your new success look like? What, you know, like what you predicted in cash flow, what you predicted in projects, pretty much at the beginning of the year is all going out of the window, I can guarantee you. So have that conversation, that real conversation with your staff members or with your employer, to go and say, okay, what does success look like to us? Like what is our new success going to look like on a day-to-day basis, and plan that out, right?
I think it's a great point, Paulina, because for me that's going to be continuous. And
Yes.
and what Valerie talked about as well, it's going back to purpose. Why do we exist? What's the problem we exist to solve in the world? And when you get passionate about that, because passion is about intrinsic, purpose is about extrinsic, and when you get the fit of that, I mean, that's where resilience just happens. It's not even thought about, because the action just overcomes all the way. And that's where I think some really good people and really good businesses are actually performing.
Yeah.
And
I think defining your success as well, right? Because, and this has happened to me and other business owners that I talk about, and even here within our household, is what did I do today? I don't think I got anything done. I wasn't productive at all today. And then we actually sit around the dinner table and say, okay, what did you do today? You know, oh, just this, bam, bam, bam. And all of a sudden you listed 20 things that you actually did, and went, oh, that's actually not bad. So having a look at, you know, redefining what success actually is in this new working environment is quite important too. Gail, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I was just sort of thinking about the intrinsic or extrinsic validation. And I think too many people rely on the external to make them feel good. And it's a very, very dangerous position to put ourselves in, because, you know, if I had to rely on testimonials from my clients, and I have to say, you know, they've always been very good, which is great. It's great for the ego, but I'm the one that has to determine how well I thought I did. Because if you allow other people to control how you feel about yourself, then you're putting yourself on a very, very slippery slope. And that happens a lot in teams, Paulina, as I'm sure you know. You'll get people who, if they don't get a pat on the back, whether it's virtual or verbal or, you know, an email that says, hey, you did a good job today, then they leave themselves wide open to end up relying on other people to validate them.
Yeah, I think
over.
I think that like when you like these days, the new way of setting KPIs isn't about your boss telling you this is what you need to achieve. New KPIs, you sit down with your employer and as an employee and go and say, this is what I believe I can achieve. And then you have a conversation around it, right? So you're really, and I think that is really key. Just being told what you need to achieve is just gonna put so much more pressure on it. While if you have the conversation around, is it right or not? And great comment, Pascal. Absolutely, it's about outcomes. We are living in a world where it's not about sitting down for 8 hours doing a job and leaving again. We are now living in a world where we're going and saying, what do we need to end up with by the end of the week, and how do we get there? Like I've had this struggle when I was employed, hence I'm no longer employed. That people would tell me that I had to be somewhere for 10 hours or 8 hours, and I had to do whatever I needed to do at that point. Most of the times I could do it in like 60-70% of the time, and I still had to sit there for 30% of the time twiddling my thumbs. This is no longer, we are no longer live in a world of time, an hour is exchanged for time. It's what outcome do we require and how do we get there? And it is a two-way street. It's not you as the leader or it's the manager telling them what needs to happen. It's how can we make it happen together and what is fair and reasonable? And that's a conversation, a two-way conversation.
So going on that, Gail, great points, Paulina, and going to your conversations before, Gail, around the command and control type leadership and, going from what are practical tips from here, because there are those leaders that are struggling right now, and command and control may or may not work, obviously for employees perspective. How do we develop from these conversations that we're having today? What do those type of leaders need to understand to change? What do they need to do to change, and how as employees can help them change?
I think
sorry. The first question to ask is more what type of leader do they want to be? Because the way of leadership they and that's a question they have to ask themselves. The way they are leading isn't working. So what kind of leader do they want to be before they go into the next question?
Yeah, I can understand that. But if you've been doing it for the 20+ years, are they going to ask that question? So what you've got to raise that self-awareness. Absolutely. How can others have these conversations to say, look, I don't like that style. Stop dictating to me. You're annoying me. I'm out of here. But I guess absolutely correct. What kind of leader do I want to be? But I guess what other tips have we got for those type of people to and because what we don't want to have is digital conflict and bullying and all that kind of stuff. So how do we move forward? I guess for those type of we haven't got time to go through every type of different leadership type today, and changing the mindset. But let's concentrate on that one, Gail.
I think it's more about a lot of the leaders that I've worked with in the past, and some of them have been CEOs. A lot of people who lead in terms of command and control, they kind of fall into that way of being, because so often people who are technically very skilled, they'll get promoted because somebody will sort of say, oh, there's a promotion come up, you'll be really good at that. So they go for it and they get it. The problem is that they spend less and less time doing what they love and more time having to manage people, which is not necessarily their strength. And I know for a fact, probably more than half of my past clients, and there's been quite a few over the 21 years, have said that they were thrown into a leadership role and they didn't get any training in how to lead. So they thought back on an old boss who basically got stuff done, and then they modeled that behavior, even though it wasn't their preferred way of being. So going to your point, so we need to have that awareness as well, but going to your point, Tony, about how can team members say to their leader or their manager that they didn't like the way that they led them before. I think there's a lot of thought got to go into that kind of conversation, because you can't turn around and say to somebody, I don't like the way you led me before, because that's not going to have a productive outcome. You have to take ownership of what it was like for you and what works for you. And being able to say to someone, hey, do you know, I noticed that over the last 4 or 5 weeks, I've managed to get a lot done. And I've really liked the fact that you've checked in with me occasionally, because that gave me the space to practice things that perhaps I may not have practiced in the past. And how do you feel about how I've performed? Does this work? Does the output that I've achieved, the outcomes that I've achieved, work for you? So maybe we could look at going forward how I find it easier to be led and how you could find it easier to lead.
Yeah, good.
Another one, and I agree with Gail. Another conversation to be had is what are our key learnings. So we've done this for the last 4 and 6 weeks. What have I and I agree with Gail. You need to take as an employee. You need to take responsibility for yourself. So I would lead the conversation by saying, "This is what I've learned about myself and about you as a leader over the last 4 weeks." And I don't mean going and saying, you are, as a leader, you are rubbish. It's more around, I've learned that, you've really let go over the last 4 weeks. This enabled me to do X, right? But I've also learned about myself that with this type of leadership, I feel much more empowered. So it's not about, the conversation isn't about you are not good as a leader. The conversation is about, this is how I can be more productive and more efficient and achieve more for you if you do this.
Look, this has been fantastic, guys, because and the main theme through this is that self-reflection, being self-aware, looking at that self-purpose, and then understanding where you're coming from. So during lockdown, some of us have been extremely busy and have actually had that time to go, is this how I want to work? Is this who I am? Is this what I want to be doing? So I'm going to move the conversation, conscious of time, to a little bit about, there's obviously been a number of redundancies and people that have lost their jobs over this time. How do they pick themselves up? What should they be looking at from, again, Shane, from the elite athlete's perspective, right across the board on, yes, this bad things happen to you. This is an opportunity. You can either be, look at the glass half full, glass half empty. So what kind of practical tips can we be encouraging those guys to, you'll find something else, go, what is your hobby, make it into a business, do some side hustles, find another job, even if you've been rejected 20 times, it's okay. So what kind of things can we help with that, those, people in those situations? Shane, I'll start with you on this one.
Thanks. Good question. Yeah, that's an interesting one. And I suppose what I initially think about there is the purpose of why they do what they do. So when you think about athletes, and a lot who I work with, I don't care about outcome. I don't care about them winning or getting to a place, because at some point in time they have to retire. They could be forced by injury to retire next week. So it's actually how it comes back to, again, it's the same point. It's beyond purpose and beyond values. It's actually self-identity. And the concept of who you think you actually really are. Like who you are. It's not, I like this and I like that. There's many, many layers. And it's working with that person in a completely different level. Because it's almost not a transition anymore, it's a transformation, because the change has happened. You have to transition and transform to something else. That's a big question that I think that requires a lot more than, for me, a nice simple answer. Because there's a lot of complexity, and as I mentioned, there's a lot of layers behind getting that person to really understand who they are and how well they know that. And then from there, so what do you want to do with your time? And then some values started to come in with it. Okay, so say for example, one of the values was, you know, you were to, you're an All Black. And if you really hold the value true of you wanting to inspire a nation through rugby, what is that and why? So what could you actually do now when you're not playing rugby? So how would you go about that? Would you like to continue with coaching? Would you like to connect with another level? What about the sport did you enjoy? Was it the people? Was it the pressure? Can you go into schools? Can you help? So it's actually just working with them to really figure that out as well, because like I said, it's not a simple answer. I hope that answers your question, Tony.
Good. No, I definitely knew it wasn't a simple answer, but that, you know, I've got goosebumps just thinking about, you know, processing what you were saying there, Shane. That's fantastic stuff. Paulina, you got some thoughts around that?
Yeah, I do a lot of work around this
Yes.
with people. So the biggest question, as in, I'm taking it back to the business owners, right, and our team members. The biggest question you need to ask that person at the point is, what do you need from me right now? Like, so there's no point, like most people want to be listened to, so there's no point in turning around and giving them all the great ideas of what you could be doing and side hustles and blah blah blah. You really need to go and say, what do you require from me? Do you want me to listen? Do you want me to help you get through this? Do you want me to support you in any form or other way? And really figure out what it is they require. When they get to a stage, because what will happen is people get shell shocked and instantly, and I'm leading this back to Jim because Jim had a really good statement before. It's
Yes.
as soon as people lose their jobs, the first thing they think of is their worst case scenario, and their worst case scenario in their head is so much worse than reality. So what I would encourage every employer to do, and you know, when you have to let the team go, or even your employees, is work with your employees around the idea of what is your worst case scenario. Because you might be thinking that you're going to be living under the bridge, but in reality, you know, you're moving your parents in, or you're moving in with your parents, and for the next 6 months you're going to live with them before you go back up, right? Really think about the reality of your worst case scenario, because once you've developed what that is, you no longer have that instant reaction of, oh my god, like my whole world is falling apart. You just get back to that stage of going, this is a step back, but I am still going to be able to move into the right direction. And then obviously, like Shane said, there's so much more to purpose. Figuring out what the Japanese call their ikigai. I don't know if you've ever heard that term, but it's really like figuring out what is it, what gets you out of bed every morning, right? And what you're good at and what you love doing, all that kind of stuff, and then see what is the skill set you can get paid for. Now, if your worst case scenario is that you are going to sleep under the bridge and that's your reality, your reaction will be completely different to when it means like, oh yeah, I'm not gonna repay my mortgage in 4 years, but it will take me 6, right? It'll be a completely different scenario for you. And then based on that, you can work with it or communicate with that human being. But yeah, first question is always, what do you need right now? What help do you need?
That's fantastic, Paulina. And if we can help support and you're talking friends, family, colleagues, absolutely. And you know, and yourself, what do I need right now? Because if I get asked the question as someone that's been made redundant, for example, how can I answer that? What do I do? So again, that self-reflection and awareness. Look, guys, I'm conscious of time. We're smack dab on 4 o'clock. And Gail, I know you were jumping a bit to talk about that. So what I'll do, we just want to do a quick summary, a roundup, any last minute tips or tricks, and Gail, if any last words from yourself.
I think what you've just said, Paulina, is really, really important, because nobody wants you to be, oh yeah, but you could do this, that, or the next thing, because they're going through such turmoil. And they're not just worrying about themselves, they're worrying about their family, they're worrying about their friends, what will people think of them. As you said earlier, Tony, you know, people see themselves, they get their identity from the business title. So asking them, you know, what can I do for you right now? is just a variation of what you've just said, Paulina. So, yeah.
Yep. Shane, any last tips and tricks where people can move from here? I mean, believe me, this is a subject that we could talk about for the next 3 hours. There's so much we can discuss here, and I really appreciate you guys' time for the last hour. We'll probably have to get you guys back. It's been fantastic. But Shane, any last commentary for I guess some tips on how can we move from there? What should we be doing for the next week?
Yeah, great question. Because for me, Jim, you summed up a few adjectives there. Was really nice. I suppose back to Gail and Paulina's point there is, okay, what do you need for the next week? It's a great question. What support can you give? And maybe asking that of others, asking that of your wife asking that of you, or your partner, your spouse, or how can you be there? In the work world, asking that of your employees. Some tools, some techniques. I mean, I'm big on courage, because that one word has such a massive meaning behind it, and how we act about that. Because we don't really know what's around the corner. But when we build a resilience up and change a whole neurological way of being, that will help us with any challenge in the future. So my tip or tool or technique of what I do is I challenge myself every morning with a 30-second cold shower in the middle of the shower.
I've tried that. Good on you.
And then
I'm with you. I'm doing cold showers as well.
And then you move on to a minute, 3 minutes.
Wim Hof.
That's right. So that's a way of actually going through the challenge of the courageous act, and within that there's the challenge, because going through that physical experience changes and reinforces a neurological difference. So that would be one thing I would offer as a tool or technique. It doesn't change mindset.
Awesome.
It just gives something to think about and act differently.
Love those two words. One is resilience, because we all are training our resilience right now, and the courage. And the courage could be going to your wife or husband and say, look, I've been made redundant. Or courage maybe facing the facts at what's happening, and also thinking about possible and positive in your life as well. I think I really love the words when we're talking, don't let the past push you down, but let the future pull you forward. And I love the courage word, because there is so much beyond that. Thank you.
That's great, Paulina. I'm going to leave it to you to get the last words in and to sum up, because we've just gone over time. So over to you.
Thank you so much, Tony. So I think my last words would be really courageous. Like what I do every morning and every night is have a really solid routine, morning and evening routine, and that doesn't have to be long. It can be like 20 minutes around. And I always start every morning. My routine always starts with like really waking up, and the first thing I think of is, what am I grateful for today? Like, what is it? The day has only just started, but what am I grateful for today? That's how my routine starts. And I always finish the evening when I'm lying in bed with, what am I grateful for today? And really think about it. You always find something because you're in the present moment. That's going back to the now. But exciting, because we can talk about this for hours. Exciting news is Gail and Shane have agreed to jump on board onto our Facebook page, and we are starting, what was it, Mindset May, where we're going over Mindset May, where we over the next 4 weeks going to be sharing some practical tools and questions to ask yourself in our Facebook group, all about mindset, about all that kind of thing. So I encourage you guys all, if you're not on our Facebook group yet, to jump into our Facebook group, ask questions around it as well. Gail, Shane, and myself will be in there posting a few snippets over the next month around how you can stay positive, like think positively. Thank you, Pascal, for adding it there. This is a weekly session, so I'm just going to finish now. This is a weekly session. Next week, we're going to talk about what to do with once you've restructured. So we have a lot more work coming our way for a reduced workforce. So we're going to talk about automation and what kind of things you can automate or should automate, and when you should automate, all that kind of questions around everything IT to make our lives a little bit easier. And this Friday we have Valerie. We have a good news story again, which is going to be really cool. Who is joining us this Friday?
So we've got, well, the second person is not confirmed yet, but one of the business owners. So the Friday concept is always about local businesses. So literally people from Bioplenty, Tauranga, Mamanganui, they're joining us and they're sharing how they've been dealing with this current situation and how they changing their businesses and what's happening to them. And it's been absolutely fascinating. So please join us 2 p.m. Friday, and one of the instructors is person who's joining us. She's a Zumba instructor, but she's absolutely extraordinary young woman, and so looking forward to that session as well.
Perfect. So that's a Facebook Live, also directly in our group. You don't have to register for that, so you can just listen in. It's always on a Friday at 2 o'clock. But otherwise, we will see you next week. We will send out a link again for you guys to register. And thank you so much for joining, Pascal. I can see you have one. Oh, you are on mute, Pascal.
Last parting words. If there are multiple ways for you all to access all sorts of groups or one-on-one, but I cannot help but stress, and if you want to share, our wonderful Valerie is actually spending more time in the community by offering a free one-on-one consultation. So if you know anyone who's looking at business services, financial help in your community, there's the link right now in the chat. It's a long link, sorry, I copied everything, but just the first part. So that's another way to connect all the locals in our community. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you guys. So yes, you can reach out to any one of us if you have any questions at any given time. We are here to support the local community. And with that, I'm going to say apologies for running over. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you next Wednesday. See you later, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Right.